You are in for a treat tonight. Not me. These fellows here, wait until you hear them. See, I'm a bad saxophone player, but they're so good, you think that I'm good, see? Our first song tonight is a song called Horizon Ahead. And that means your career, when it begins, the horizon is always in front of you, and you try to get from here to there, which is the horizon. But we never reach there somehow. I've never heard anybody say, here we are at the horizon. There is no such thing, which means we try and we try and we try to get better and better. Yeah, you know, I'm glad I'm not a soccer player or a boxer or tennis. Can you imagine me playing soccer at 83 years old? Oh, this is so much better. Horizon Ahead.
Thank you.
Many years ago, in my hometown of Philadelphia, oh, it was so long ago, my goodness. When I first got my first saxophone, I was 14 years old, yeah. And it was the summertime, and I was doing my repetition in the living room on the front of the house, and all of the windows were open, and all of the neighbors could hear me, and they wanted to kill me. It was terrible. And later, I met another saxophone player, and he joined me in my living room, and they wanted to kill two people, and that was the late John Coltrane. We were not so good in those days. But later we got better, and we got hired by a local band, 15 musicians, and John was playing alto and I was playing tenor. Jimmy Johnson and his ambassadors. Oh, it was fantastic. The music was terrible. But we felt that we had come out of my living room and now we were playing in front of people. Fantastic. And we thought we were doing good. But soon after that, they let us go. We were not so good. But we got better later. And you know, during that time, there was always a song that the musicians played, And they played it fast, very fast, to show how good they were. And I remember when I started, that song was called Liza. Yes, all the musicians who wanted to show how good they were, they played Liza fast as the wind. Then later, I got older and found that they were playing Sweet Georgia Brown fast. Wow, and much later, I found out they were playing Cherokee fast as the wind. But you know, I'm going to go back because I'm an old guy now, and I'm going to play Sweet Georgia Brown, but not as fast as the wind, because when we get older, somehow those fast tempos get slower and slower and slower. I'm going to play Sweet Georgia Brown at the speed of reality. Are we ready? Yeah. In New York City, when you mention uptown, we're always talking about Harlem, north of 110th Street. Now, when I first came to New York years ago, I was working with a guy, what was his name? Oh yeah, Dizzy Gillespie. We were working, we played Birdland a lot. And when you went up to Harlem, you had to be careful, especially at nighttime. But years later, I went to Harlem, and usually when I went to Harlem, I only saw black people. I went to Harlem, and I said, what? I saw black people and I saw white people. I said, Harlem has changed. And I told my wife, maybe we should move uptown. So we moved uptown, 129th Street and Lenox Avenue, a new building, new apartment. This is fantastic. In the building, black people and white people. This is great. Then I said, the barber shop, to cut your hair, right across the street, the barber shop. Then I found later that was headquarters for all the crack and the dope. Disappointment. And next door was a beautiful house. And later I found out prostitution? Wait a minute, just a moment. And on my corner, 129th and Lenox, all the young kids with the caps on backwards and the pants hanging down very low and sneaks. Wow, I wonder. One day I came out, there were 5 police cars. What happened? Usually when people come to shoot you, you're on the same level on the street. But this guy was different. He was shooting from the 5th floor window down to the street. Oh my goodness. My neighbor across the hall, he came out and he said, "The experiment is over." And he moved and we moved. And I think about Harlem and I think about walking around in Harlem. And I said, let me write a tune about this. And I called it Uptown. I wrote so many tunes, Uptown this and Uptown that. What's the name of this tune? Uptown Promenade, walking around. Yeah, now the police, on the weekend, Friday and Saturday, the police, so many police there. So you felt very comfortable. But at midnight, the police all went away. Oh, it was different after midnight. Yeah, we moved back down, further back down. And I think about Harlem now with this tune, Uptown Promenade. Yeah, that means walking around. But now I walk somewhere else. I thought I wrote that song, but I think these guys wrote it. The way they played it, my goodness. You only have 4 strings? Do you have some strings behind? Incredible. Incredible. Well, I'll tell you what. You should have the privilege of hearing these 3 musicians play without my presence. Don't clap too loud because I'm coming back. But when I was a kid, back in Philadelphia, learning how to play the saxophone, seriously, I used to dream about playing with musicians like these fellows. And I thought, from my vantage point in Philadelphia, I thought I would always find them in Manhattan, New York City. But I come all the way to Istanbul, and they're here. And you have the privilege of hearing them all the time, and I only hear them for 2 days. What a pity. Maybe I should take you back to Manhattan. No, but you should know how good these fellows are. So they're going to play just as a trio. Benny Golson will come later. But listen to them because they're very clever. And they, they play the same songs all the time. You hear them play these same songs. But you know what it's like? It's like going to the forest every day. But you go to a different tree every day. And this is what happens. They don't play the same solos. Oh, no. Because each time they play, they have something different on their mind, and they tell you a different story as they play the same song. So that's what makes it exciting. And all of us, when we wake up in the morning, what do we think about after breakfast? We think about, what can I do today better than I did yesterday? So we're always trying to get better and more creative. Creativity. Creativity never retires, never. And what does it begin with? It begins with curiosity. What is this? What is that? What happens if I do this? What happens if I do not do that? And then what happens next? The imagination. You start mixing and putting things together. And then what happens next? You remember the Frankenstein picture, 1931? The professor was creating this monster. He got hands from here, and he got a leg here, and an arm from here, and he sewed them and put them together. And then he opened the roof, and the gurney went up, and then the lightning came. Then he brought the monster back down, and he was looking at him, and he saw the finger move. Ah, it's alive. That's what happens when we play our music. Ah, it's alive. Because we've created something did not exist before. Before that moment, it did not exist. And this is what makes our music such an adventure. We have something to look forward to each day. It's not the same old thing. And that's so nice. It's not like Lawrence Welk. They know who Lawrence Welk is. Yeah, so listen to them as they, what are you going to play? They know so many songs.
Maybe You and the Night and the Music.
You and the Night and the Music. Do you remember that song? I would sing it for you, but I don't know the words. You and the Night and the Music. You know the melody, but listen to what they do to you and the night and the music. These are